So in terms of structure for the session, we're going to run for approximately an hour. I think we'll probably have you clear, certainly within 60 minutes, and that's what we'll aim to do. The agenda really is to give you a little bit of background to the current challenge in local government. These will be topics and issues that you're all familiar with around channel shift and reducing avoidable contact and enabling self-service and so on and so forth. But we want to just spend a few minutes talking through that and how we see it and what we hear about those challenges when we talk to and work with our customers. We'll then spend a little bit of time giving you some background and introduction to the platform that we offer and its capabilities and how it's organised. We'll talk about a specific local authority, which is Wiltshire Council, who are using our platform in quite an extensive and expansive fashion. So we'll talk a little bit about their approach. And then we'll give over the majority of the time that we've got together this morning actually showing you what this stuff looks like in practice. So we're going to give you a bit of a demonstration. As I said, we'll take Q&A, not at the end, but we'll take that via the chat facility as we move through this morning. So do feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, though, albeit digitally, and we'll do our best to answer them between myself and Rachel. So that's the structure for the day. As I said, we'll have you clear within an hour. So a little about the background to the current challenge, and this is not really a marketing message from our organisation, from Avos about our product. This is what we hear from our customers when we speak with them, both before we work with them as part of a due diligence exercise, before they adopt our platform and tools, and also it's a common theme of the conversation as we get started, and it's a common challenge, and you will all be familiar with it in one way or the other. But the way that we think about it and the way that we talk to our customers about it is that the proposition and the challenge for local authorities, and in fact more broadly public service bodies in the UK, is this: that somewhere in the region of 80% of customer and crucially internal processes really can be made codified and to all intents and purposes be made self-service, and therefore manifest as a set of business rules that ultimately require limited or no professional judgment or discretion. Now, that's a generalisation, so there are always going to be exceptions to that rule, and certainly there are, and there are certainly nuances that we need to be conscious of, but there's also a very important flip side, which is it's crucial that we don't overlook, which is that if 80% or somewhere in the region of 80% of internal transactions and customer processes can be automated and made largely self-service, that leaves a very important minority of, depending on how you want to slice the number, of let's say 20% of cases, or at least specific aspects of cases, that professional judgment and discretion is absolutely crucial. And they can often be some of the more mission-critical processes. So the challenge that faces public service organisations and local authorities in particular in delivering the wider array of services for which you are responsible is how do you effectively break down that 80-20 or 75-25, however you want to think about it. How do you break down those percentages and identify safely and effectively those that are appropriate for automation self-service and those aspects or those particular transactions that are not? And that's very much kind of a resource planning and a process planning approach, as opposed to a particular element of the challenge that the technology can fix. But it is the technology that ultimately enables the majority of transaction types, both internal and customer-facing, to be automated. So if that's the challenge, how can we add some greater detail to that picture? And what I'm about to draw on screen for you is a graphic that broadly describes what that challenge looks like when we talk to our customers about these issues. So I'm going to build that screen up for you, and then I'm going to annotate it or scribble over it, however you best want to describe it. But you should be seeing a pyramid on screen that represents the kind of general shape of transaction types and processes that go on in local authorities in particular. Across the base of the pyramid, the breadth of that pyramid represents loosely the volume of those sorts of transaction types. So the wider the base of the pyramid, arguably the higher the volume of transaction types. And we've then got two vertical axes that I'll come on to explain in a moment. But the basic pattern that we see emerging from the work that we do with our customers is that at the bottom of that pyramid, you've got your fairly high volume, but generally lower complexity type transactions. So that might be someone reporting a fly tip or reporting some graffiti or dog fouling or whatever it might be. But some of these kind of very geographically focused, often quite high volume, but generally lower complexity type challenges. And on the whole, those types of challenges are relatively straightforward to make self-service and relatively low risk. So that tends to be where lots of organisations start to think about the automation and making of self-service and digital engagement for customers and internal processes. As you push up that pyramid in terms of different types of transactions, so a number of factors come into play which we think it's important to be aware of and to plan accordingly around. With some of those, certainly as you move up the pyramid, greater complexity starts to emerge. So you might have aspects of payment or application or eligibility that start to creep into those transaction types, or implications of large and complex data networks across multiple databases. If you think about something like a change of address request, where someone might have an identity in maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 and beyond of systems that you use internally in the back office, and if you're going to accept a change of address, you need to make sure that that is updated across all of those systems simultaneously. So as you move up that process, up that pyramid, so the picture becomes arguably more complicated in terms of what's happening within a specific transaction. What also tends to happen, but this is not an absolute truth, is that as you move up the pyramid, the volume tends to decrease, although we are aware that there are certain types of transaction that arguably are quite complicated. It might be to do with council tax inquiries and those sorts of things, but actually are also quite high volume. So as with every rule, there's always an exception to it. But as a general position, you move up the pyramid, you generally see decreasing volume, and you will generally see increasing complexity. Alongside that, on the right-hand axis, as you look at this graphic on screen, two other factors are at play. Often you will have increased risk. That could be real risk in terms of if something goes wrong, you have as a problem a major kind of collateral implication or potential damage that's done reputationally or procedurally or to an individual. So there's increased risk, and there's also increased perceived risk. So that risk may or may not be real, but it's felt and seen by potentially officers or elected members of your council, and that can often lead to this other phenomenon that we would term more broadly cultural resistance. So as you push up to some of these more complicated and arguably perceived as risky transaction types to make self-service, so you will often bump into aspects of cultural resistance, and you might describe that as political resistance, sometimes with a small p. So there's quite a complicated picture going on in terms of what local authorities as organisations need to deal with to effectively make channel shift happen and transformation happen in terms of customer and internal transactions. So it's not a straightforward task. I think we share this context to show a little of our understanding about the challenges, and also to kind of offer some empathy around the fact that we acknowledge this is not entirely straightforward and needs to be thought out carefully, and we think it's a significant challenge, and we're working with a number of organisations to help them address those challenges. So, a little bit about the background of the current challenges as we see it, and I expect as you are experiencing it as local authority and public sector professionals. If I move on now to talk in a little bit more detail about what My Council Services is specifically, some of you may have some background or may be aware of some of our customers, or have spoken to colleagues that have seen demonstrations and met with us previously, but to provide you with some additional background, we talk about My Council Services really as the only synchronised and integrated multi-channel, online and native mobile customer engagement platform with an integral mobile working capability. That is a bit of a mouthful, I accept, so I'm going to circle back on that definition, and I'm going to try and define some of the more nuanced points. So when we say synchronised, what we mean is the ability to design a process, be that a customer-facing process, or be it an internal process, to design that process or that transaction set once, but to be able to deploy that more than once. And the typical channels of deployment that we are offering to our customers today is the native mobile channel, so the ability to have a suite of native mobile applications. We'll talk about the specific benefits of those in a moment. And synchronised to that, the ability to deploy exactly the same functionality that is available through your native mobile applications through browser-based web forms and a browser-based portal that customers can use that's an embedded and integrated part of your corporate web property. So it's native application and it's browser-based customer interaction, customer engagement, customer self-service. So that's what we mean by synchronized. Design it once, deploy it multiple times. When we come on to talk about integrated, what we mean here is the ability to make sure that the data that's thrown off any of those transactions, that's created through a customer submitting a service request or applying to something or paying for something, that the data associated with that transaction is automatically and enabled through technology automatically pushed through to your back office system so that someone in the organisation who is responsible for doing something about that particular transaction type can get on and do it without the need to re-enter data or recapture data or phone the customer up or whatever it might be. So it's about integrating the flow of data into the organisation automatically, and crucially, once you have accepted the service request or the application or whatever it happens to be, whatever the transaction type is, once that's been accepted by your organisation within your service level agreements, as you progress that through to some form of acceptable conclusion for you and the customer so that you can keep the customer updated. So that data flow is in two directions. It's from the customer or potentially the mobile officer into the council's IT infrastructure, and then it's back out to the customer or the mobile officer from a mobile working context in terms of keeping the customer or the worker updated. From a usage point of view, and we'll show you more about the customer experience in a moment, but from a usage point of view, it's completely free to access for customers, of course. And certainly from a native application point of view, the next point is quite important in that the service is what we call nationally enabled. And I'm going to show you an example of that as we get into the demonstration part of the webinar session this morning. But what that means in essence is that if a service request that is being raised by a customer is geographically referenced in some way, so it's referenced to a particular spot in the country, on the planet, so let's take graffiti or a fly tip as an example, there's a chance that the customer doesn't actually know whose jurisdiction or which local authority boundary that particular incident sits within. And that's a perfectly common and acceptable and plausible scenario to find for a member of the public not knowing and not caring much about which authority boundary they happen to be in. So one of the features of certainly the native application piece and the service more broadly is that wherever an incident is in the country, whichever flavour or branded version of our service a customer happens to be using, we can always guarantee that it will route through to the appropriate authority based on the location of the incident. So that's what we mean by nationally enabled. So you might be a user of the service in St Helens and a resident of St Helens, but you may have travelled to Birmingham for the day. You may still want to report things that are the responsibility of the local authority or the public sector more broadly, and the application, the platform will figure out to whom it should belong based on the location of that incident. We offer that functionality across web and across native mobile, and when we talk about native mobile, we think about iPhone, we think about Android, we think about BlackBerry, and now we're offering a Windows 8 version for mobile. So right across all of those major mobile development platforms, and that's part of the headache that we deal with as a service delivery partner and product delivery partner is to take care of that overhead around development and keeping pace with technology change both on the browser side and the native mobile application side. What we also do is we try to break our product down into logical modular groups, and I'll talk a bit more about those as we move through and define when I'm talking about which products. And we offer what we describe as a functionally rich back office capability that actually allows you as a using organisation to do all sorts of different things through the app and through the browser-based portal. And we want you to be able to do those things in a self-service way too. So the self-service aspects of development of the products that we deliver not only relate to the user experience and the customer experience as in your customer, but they also relate to our customers, you as local authorities, because as much as possible we make the application completely configurable and customizable through a set of back office screens. And I will be showing you and providing you with a brief tour through some of that feature and function. So we offer a customer self-service component which covers mobile applications and synchronized and integrated web forms, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We offer a mobile working platform that enables council officers to work remotely and receive assigned service requests and tasks that they are going to be responsible for of any description. and I'll talk a bit about that, and I'll show you some of that functionality. And we also now are offering a contact center CRM back office. I'm going to talk less about that today. That's less the feature of this session. I'm also going to start to introduce some other concepts around social media that we're working on at the moment that I think you'll be interested to see. So that's a little about My Council Services and what it is. A couple of other bits and pieces. I talked about the importance of integration into back office systems. We believe passionately in that, and we think that's an important part of receiving and delivering the benefits out of self-service capabilities. It's no use if you're rekeying and double entering data. It does really need to be integrated into back office. And we are completely back office, so we are completely agnostic about which back office systems you happen to be using. And we've integrated into a very wide range of line of business and or CRM applications. And then we leave you with a set of configurable integration web services. I'll talk more about that as we move through. The piece that we offer is a managed service, and it's largely and it's exclusively private cloud delivery. So it's UK-based, directly controlled hosting facilities, a primary and secondary hosting centre in the UK. As a business, we are fully DPA, so Data Protection Act compliant, and we are also registered with the Information Commissioner's Office as a data processor. So the data that flows through our application is owned by the accountable authority, but we are the custodian of that data while it's on our infrastructure. We also offer more broadly a set of services and technology components about master data management, so the delivery of a golden customer record, a single customer record and a single customer view. So that's increasingly becoming part of the service that we offer, or one of the services that we offer to our customers. So hopefully that provides you with a bit of background around My Council Services and the range of products and services that we offer. I want to talk that through in pictures now, as it were, before we move on to a bit of detail about customers and then for you to see the technology in action. So the challenge that sits in front of local authorities, as we've discussed, is you've got customers out in the borough, in the district, in the unitary area, wherever it happens to be, that want and need and have to do things through and with their local authority. How do you get the data and the information around that particular issue, or whatever it happens to be, or that particular transaction, from the customer and into the local IT infrastructure of your specific organisation? So how do you bridge that gap? And I'm going to go and build up the slide now. But we've talked about the range of application types and transaction types that customers might want to do. They might want to request something like a bulky item uplift. They might want to report something like a pothole or an abandoned vehicle or a fly tip. They may want to just retrieve some information proactively about a local service. They may want to apply for something. They may want to pay for something. Or they may want to investigate something that's specific to them. So a whole range of different applications and transaction types that customers will want and need to do and need to be enabled to do in a self-service context. Add on to that then the fact that you've got typically quite large numbers of staff in even relatively small, modest-sized local authorities, what we might refer to as mobile workers, people that are not always centrally based at a depot or a location, and they will also need to be implicated in this flow of data. So we offer these mobile working tools alongside the customer access tools. If I build the picture up now, and I'll just talk you through it. We offer, the first thing that I would call out is we offer channel of choice. So we offer native mobile application, and we offer browser-based web portal. And we also offer the cloud-based manage layer, which I've referenced, which gives you a whole range of tools. So a whole bunch of rules and conditional logic type applications. So if it's a graffiti report and it contains obscene or homophobic language or imagery, then it's got a criminal intent, so we may also want to notify the local constabulary. That sort of multi-agency working can be triggered by our rules engine. We offer a full form design capability, so design a form once and deploy that both to native mobile application and also to browser-based web, and also decide which portions of that form are appropriate for council officers versus members of the public, or make only certain types of form available to certain types of users. So there's an access, role-based access and privilege control set of capability within the platform too. And that speaks to some of the mobile working applications, and I've also mentioned things like CRM. What we're also just releasing now, or just starting to introduce with our customers, is the ability to start to harness not just directly controlled channels like a branded and wholly owned native application or your website, but you will be aware of already and familiar with, I expect, all of the other social media channels that are available that customers are using. So the reality of the situation for all service providers now, be you a public sector service provider or a commercial service provider, is that we don't necessarily now have full control over all the channels that our customers choose to use. So one of the kind of parts of the demo that I'd like to show you this morning is how we can deliver some tools that enable you to start to at least capture and make more systematic the way that customers are using some of these third-party channels and less structured channels like Twitter and Facebook. I'm going to focus a little bit on a Twitter example today. How do you actually start to use these channels that customers are using and maybe mentioning you in and raising issues in that are relevant to you that you need to be able to capture and get into your IT system so that you can work with them and deal with them within the realms of a normal service request. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about social media as part of the demonstration today. I promised I'd talk more about who our customers are. So there's a list of customers up on screen at the moment. I'm not going to read through all of them for you. As I've said, we will be distributing a copy of the slides for you after the event today, so you will have this as a reference material. But a wide range of different organisation types within the local authority sector, and suffixed onto each of those customers where integration has been a feature are the systems that we've integrated into with and for the council. And you'll see that it ranges from relatively modest size authorities that maybe 80 to 100,000 population or so, someone like a Winchester perhaps, up to much larger unitary authorities like Glasgow and Belfast and so on, and everyone pretty much in between. We also have a good selection of Welsh authorities, and we're delivering Welsh language capability as a dynamic translation capability. I'll show you some of that as part of the demonstration today. So Torfaen in South Wales, and also Rhondda Cynon Taf, another of the Welsh customers. You'll see lots of examples of integration into different CRM systems. So Lagan's a common feature, Microsoft Dynamics is quite a common feature, and all manner of different types of CRM and back office application that we've delivered. Small and relatively inexpensive projects to enable integration. So some examples of customers. I just want to talk to you a little bit about Wiltshire as an example. They're quite an interesting example of an authority, a former county authority. In 2007, they were moved into a unitary structure, so that absorbed, I think, 5 local district and borough authorities into the larger, what is now Wiltshire Council. Quite a large unitary authority. I'll talk a bit more about how long they've been using our technology in a moment, but servicing quite a large population of over 400,000, and with a discretionary budget of somewhere in the region of 800 million. And in fact, we had Andy Spurway, who's head of service delivery at Wiltshire, presenting at our customer advisory board in Birmingham last week, which is an annual conference that we run for our customers. And Andy's phrase around that 800 million budget was that it's 800 million and shrinking by the hour, which raised a wry laugh in the room. And I expect that's a budgetary context that many of you on the call this morning will be able to relate to. So in terms of technology infrastructure, when we arrived on the scene, Wiltshire were using Lagan's CRM. They were using 2 of their kind of primary back office applications, certainly for street scene and highways, were Mayrise and XOR. And they started to work with us in March of 2012. And I'll just build up a timeline of their relationship with us and using our technology, and then talk you through that. So Wiltshire conducted some market testing on, more broadly, eForms capability, and more specifically native application, mobile application capability back at the tail end of 2011. It was quite an involved and detailed market testing exercise that we were involved in. We were selected for a pilot project, a 12-month pilot with Wiltshire as of March 2012. That was a paid pilot, so it did go into production. It wasn't a back office test, it was a live test. Within about eight weeks or so, we delivered a suite of branded mobile apps for them across all of the platforms that I mentioned earlier. And in the pilot episode, it was I wouldn't say it was a well-kept secret, but it was very low profile. So it was launched with only 6 service types that you could report through the suite of applications. It wasn't integrated into back office at that point, so it was very much a kind of low-risk, light-touch pilot. That ran for 12 months. And based on the metrics and measures and assessment of performance across that 12-month period and general measures of uptake, albeit quite modest, Wiltshire decided to renew that contract beyond the pilot. So that was a crucial point for us, at which we were now considered part of the broader Wiltshire Council IT stack. At that point, we worked with Wiltshire to deliver technical integration into their two key back office applications, Mayrise and XOR. So that was in September 2013. And at that point, with integration, there was some promotion around the application, the self-service capability. It went live on web and on native mobile at that point. And also what started to happen was that because the integration had been done directly to back office, at that point, the Lagan technology, was quite a small Lagan CRM footprint in the business, became somewhat of a data cul-de-sac in that regard. No reflection on the capability of the tool, but just the way that Wiltshire was moving. They were moving much more to a Microsoft standard service provision in terms of technology, for which we were the kind of customer access layer. And at that point, Wiltshire have started to use our contact center tool, which has worked well for the customer service agents. And beyond that, beyond the kind of the lower high volume, lower complexity type service requests that were being enabled for self-service, we're now delivering payment integration capability so that Wiltshire are now looking at doing more complex services in terms of self-service that involve payment and eligibility checks and so on. So that's part of the ongoing work that we're doing with them. In terms of outcomes, pretty high volumes of uptake in terms of usage of the native applications and the web property, a couple of hundred a day, several thousand a month. And that's having some positive impacts in terms of taking inbound traffic out of the Wiltshire Customer Services call centre in Melksham. And you can see those numbers on screen. In some months, early part of this year, receiving not far off 5,000 service requests through the automated self-service channels per month. In terms of what was being reported, there was one particular category that was a significant spike, and that was around the highways provision. Wiltshire are a unitary authority, so have responsibility for highways. Beyond that, lots of other street lighting, street scene type issues, street lighting, fire tipping, so on and so forth. And we'll be interested to watch that picture change as more and more services come on board, particularly the ability to pay through a native app or a web form, and the ability to apply for eligibility-based services and products and so on via the Wiltshire website and the Wiltshire apps. So quite an interesting pattern of uptake and usage through the self-service channels for Wiltshire. And in terms of specific outcomes, well, it's safe to say that there's been a significant shift to self-service channels for categories that are available through those self-service channels. So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling statement. But also improvements, tangible improvements in the customer service centre, in particular a noticeable and significant reduction in call abandonment rates. So although there was higher volumes of service requests coming through, certainly for particular types of category, what they actually experienced was actually a drop in call abandonment rates, which meant that more calls were getting answered. So some key metrics were being ticked and key objectives being met in terms of more productivity and more efficiency in the call centre. Crucially, certainly on that street scene and highways management side, Wiltshire work with outsourced partners Balfour Beatty and have quite a long-standing relationship. And some of the feedback that we've had from Wiltshire is that actually having better access to specific request types and volumes and data around those specific request types around highways and street lighting type issues gives the management of Wiltshire much better management insight and much better data with which to manage and govern and garner the outsourced resources that they're using and that they're paying for. So some interesting efficiency and cost saving benefits in the round for Wiltshire. So what I'd like to do now is just move across to start to show you some of the application technology. And to do that, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm just going to put my my handset on to speakerphone so that I can use both hands to operate my PC and my mobile device, which I'm going to attempt to share the screen of with you in a moment. Rachel, I realise you're on mute, but would you just confirm via the chat facility that the sound quality is okay once I switch to speakerphone, please? So I hope you can all hear me okay. Do shout or do let Rachel know if there's any problems or if you've got specific questions. What I'm going to attempt to do now is wake up my smartphone and share my smartphone screen with you. I always get a tiny bit panicky at this point because you're relying on technologies. Again, Rachel, I'm just going to ask you if you wouldn't mind confirming via the chat facility that you can actually see my my iPhone screen. Wonderful, thank you very much. So you're looking at my iPhone screen. Apologies for the garish backdrop. I'm going to drop us into the Council Apps directory, and what you'll see in that directory is some examples of some of the customer applications that we've delivered. So bear in mind that these applications are working both as native applications, and they're also working as browser-based forms. So there's a synchronization. But I just want to show you that the native application piece is part of this demonstration. You will have all seen these forms before. You may not have seen a manifestation of a branded, customized application for a council. And I'm going to show you an example from St Helens. If I tap into the St Helens screen, and this interface will be common across iPhone, which is what we're running on this device, and Android, and also Windows, and to the greatest extent possible BlackBerry, although BlackBerry does seem to be losing some ground in that smartphone market. What you've got then is, once you're into the application itself, you've got this easy to navigate scrollable screen, and each of the tabs on that screen, so each of these horizontal bars with leading in between, represents what we call a dynamic tab. Now, I mentioned earlier that we give you the tools to customize those tabs in any which way you choose. So I'm viewing this as a St Helens user, and what St Helens have done, at the top they've got a whole bunch of report it forms. So I drop into that section, I can see all sorts of different forms that St Helens has made available, from abandoned vehicle through antisocial behaviours, enabling customers effectively to raise a service request across a whole range of different service area types. So they've decided to stick all their report it forms behind a single report it tab. They don't have to do that. They could have had all those forms individually as a first tab on the actual app itself. You'll also notice the mobile worker application. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then as I scroll down, I start to get different types of content available to me as a user. So one of the things that St Helens has introduced is a bin collection tool. Now, if I tap on that tab, what that's actually doing, but within the dynamic framework of the app, is that's actually calling a page from the St Helens website. So this is a piece of development work that has been done internally to match postcode information, so LLPG property data with bin collection route cycles, and made available as an online application, and now been embedded as part of the native application. So a customer can go in here, put their postcode of their property in, and look up when their bin collection dates are likely to be, all within the framework of the application, albeit it's actually accessing a web-based tool on the St Helens website, which is running in a nice responsive template. So it's the integration and stitching together of different components, both web and both native application. They've also chosen to tie this in with their social media piece. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but if I tap on the Twitter feed, that loads the St Helens Twitter feed, and we can see everything that St Helens are tweeting about. Again, without exiting the framework of the application. It's also integrated with things like RSS feeds, so news feeds that they've got available on the site. So you can see there's a fact-finding on pharmacies exercise going on at the moment, which was just mentioned this morning as part of the news feeds from St Helens. So what St Helens are actually delivering is a whole set of functionality for their customers in a nice, easily combined native application framework. So customers, once they've got the app loaded on their device, all they've got to do is open the app up, and whatever St Helens are presenting is what the customer will see, and they can change that dynamically. So I want to take you through actually this reporting process first of all. So if I go into abandoned vehicle, I'm going to show you an example of reporting an issue. So if I go into abandoned vehicle, you'll see that what St Helens have got on the app under abandoned vehicle is a relatively sophisticated form. So is the vehicle tax? We'll say no, it isn't. Do we know the owner of the vehicle? We'll say no. What's the vehicle registration? I'm just going to say this is a test. Please ignore, just in case we end up submitting something. And we'll click done. And we'll just make sure that it's clear this is a test. So we can answer all of these questions. You can make these questions mandatory. You can put conditional routing and logic in these forms. And once you've created a form, it's available both on your web property, if you've embedded it on your web property, and it's available on your native mobile application. So the two are synchronized together. It then says, would you like to take a photograph of it? So I'm going to use the camera on my device to take a photo. So I'm going to take a picture of the corner of my screen in my office. And I'm going to use that photo and attach that to the report. Then I'm going to click on Next. And then, crucially, this is an abandoned vehicle report that we're submitting. So I'm going to use the map to identify the location. So if I tap on the map, what it will do, I'll just give it a second, is zoom in on my current location. And this is where I reveal that actually I've got the luxury of working from my home office today, which is out in the rural Norfolk countryside. So let's just take a thought there. I'm using the St Helens version of the app. I'm not based in St Helens at the moment, and neither actually am I a St Helens resident. I'm registered under another local authority. But I am going to use my current location to submit this particular report. I can zoom out on that map and give you a bit more context. But also, if I was doing this retrospectively, I can tap in the menu in the top left-hand corner, and I've got a whole bunch of easy-to-use on-screen tools that allow me to choose a different location. I can either search for an address by street name or city name or postcode. I can scroll the map and pick somewhere. I can have it ping back to my home address all the time if I'm a registered user, or I can just have it take my current location. So I'm just let it take my current location, and we're going to say, okay, we're happy with that, so we'll click on Done, and it will just capture that location and, best as it can, address match just using the Google address layer. We've also integrated this into LLPG for customers in the past, so it's matching back to that subsequent to submission. We'll give it an incident date, so we'll say today, and we'll give it a priority and we'll say none. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and click Submit. And what it should do is package up that data, and it will push it off, and it will bounce it against our server, and it will say, well, Bernie's using the St Helens app. He's submitted a report. That report is not in St Helens, so I'd better figure out to whom that service request should be sent. And it will just package that data up, and hopefully it should submit the report, and then it comes back and confirms back to me as the user that request is actually being submitted to South Norfolk District Council, which is actually where my home is based and where I'm working from this morning. So I've revealed my whereabouts to you all on the call. So an example of how this national enablement piece works, and actually how that's quite important when you're using certainly a device in a mobile context, as we are in this particular example. So there's a specific example from one of our customers. A couple of things I'd also like to show you. If I just go across to some other examples from other customers, I want to show you an example from Flintshire very briefly, which relates specifically to some functionality that has been developed initially in collaboration with the Welsh authorities, which is the ability to offer multilingual capability. So you'll see that, and for those of you that are not aware, I'm sure most of you are, that the Welsh authorities delivering services in both Welsh language and English language is mandated. It's a legal requirement. And it was one of the things that we were keen to help solve with our Welsh customers. And I've got an example here from Flintshire. I'm looking at the Flintshire app. You'll notice that the interface is quite similar to the example that we saw from St Helens a moment ago. Colour scheming is different, branding slightly different. But if I go into settings, I can actually choose which language type I want. So as a user of the Flintshire app, I can say, well, actually, I'm a Welsh language speaker and I want my app to be presented to me in Welsh. I'm not a Welsh speaker, so I'm going to tread very carefully here. If I just click on Done, it takes me back into the main interface, and dynamically all of that content is translated. So the process for doing that, you can use an automated translation facility that's part of the back office capability. We strongly advise against relying on that too heavily. So Flintshire, in their wisdom, have also used the auto-translate and then had that thoroughly checked by local language speakers in Wales, which is definitely what we suggest. So that then is a dynamic piece of capability that exists both on the application and on the web manifestation of these forms. I'm going to go back and switch that back because I'll get horribly lost if I try to use the app in Welsh. And what you'll see is that switches back quite quickly. So that's an important practical issue for our Welsh customers, but it's also an important issue from a broader diversity point of view, if you think about some of the metropolitan boroughs in UK local authorities, often upwards of 10, 15 different languages being spoken, and you may make the decision that you're going to support some of those. We can support up to 42 different language packs as part of that process. I'm conscious of time. We're running up against it a tiny bit. What I want to do now is to just take you into a generic version of the app, and I want to show you the full kind of life cycle of reporting. So this is just a generic version of one of the mobile applications that you can just go and download from the app stores. And I'm just going to very quickly go through and create a service request, again, just using this abandoned vehicle form. I'll just do that very briefly, just answer a couple of questions. And this time, instead of using my current location, I'll take another photograph with the camera, which I'll use. I can take multiple photographs and videos if I wanted to. I'll use the map to identify the location. Instead, this time, instead of using my current location, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to search for a particular address to show you that kind of capability, and also for a more practical reason. So I'm going to search on a particular postcode, which is actually the postcode of our London offices, and I'm going to ask the app to find that location. The reason I'm doing that is I want that to drop into the Redbridge borough, which is where this is tethered to, and so that I can show you what a service request looks like in the back office and show you the full life cycle of a report. So if I'm happy with that, I'm going to click on Done. I'm going to give it an incident date as we did last time. All of these questions, incidentally, on the form can be asked in any question designed in any particular way that you want. You've got full control over the way that a form is designed. And I'm going to click on Submit. And it's going to go through its little process again of bundling up that data and figuring out to whom it belongs based on the location of the incident. Incidentally, because I'm running on a native application, I can open up and use these forms whether or not I've got a carrier signal or a 3G signal. And that's, again, another important differentiator from just using responsive templates on sites. But, of course, we offer both browser-based and native application-based. But it's important if you're in an area where perhaps coverage is not ubiquitous, that the native app is actually kind of quite an important addition for constant accessibility. So this has figured out that this belongs to Redbridge Borough Council, which is good. Okay, so I'm hoping that gives you a sense of what this looks like from a native application point of view. What I'm going to do now is attempt to go back to my main screen. There we go. I'm just going to jump across to my browser, and I'm actually going to log in as an administrator in the back office. And see if we can find that service request that we created. So I'm transitioning now from having been a customer that was submitting a report using those various applications to a council officer now looking at those in a back office context. Okay, so we're now looking at the My Council Services back office, which I'll give you a very quick tour of the real estate. I'm conscious of the time. We're just past 4 to pass. I've got about 15, maybe 20 minutes left at most. You've got across the top a ribbon menu which gives you all of the different kind of module components of the product. We're looking at the service request screen here, and what I can see actually is that the report that I just created in Redbridge is now, you might recognise that picture on the screen. If I push back through to that, I can actually see that particular report. So we were using a mobile device a moment ago to report an issue that we said was in Redbridge, and that report is now available inside the back office application. If this was in turn integrated into your CRM application, that data would now exist inside your internal IT infrastructure. So we can see from here, what the service request number that's been appended, what the category is, what submission time was, so on and so forth. You can see that was just done a moment ago. You can see the details of the person that submitted it. I'm set up as a test user here. The questions that I answered, the photographic evidence that I attached. So you've got a thrilling picture of the corner of my monitor. and we can see, crucially, exactly where the location is. We can also see the device type from which it was submitted. So I've got a whole bunch of tools here available to me to start to actually manage that. I can actually, within this application, I can manage the status and so on and so forth. What I might also want to do, so I'm moving over now from I've gone from a customer role into a customer service agent role. I'm receiving this request, albeit in the My Account Services back office. And now I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to get someone to deal with this. I'm going to make someone responsible for this particular service request. And I'm going to assign it to an individual owner. And I'm actually going to assign it back out to myself. So now what I'm doing from a council perspective is I'm assigning ownership out of this, and I'm starting to deal with it as a process internally now. Again, this could all be automated using the rules engine that we provide to say, okay, well, if it's an abandoned service request and it's in this area, then automatically assign it to this team or this set of workers. So we'll update the owner and it will tell me that it's done that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across to the tasks menu and I'm actually going to create a task. So I've assigned the service request, so the entirety of the request that was raised, but now I'm going to create a specific task underneath it. So I'm going to say, okay, so we'll say, please inspect and remove. I think we'll say today. And we'll call it a work order. We can give it a status, we can give it a priority, we can add a description to it, we can attach files to it if we wish, we can give it a planned start and end date. So we're now very much moving into the mobile work, into automation internal process. And what I'm going to do is assign ownership of this particular task. So I've assigned ownership of the service request. I'm now going to assign ownership of the task. If I drop down another level, I can also ask for this task owner to complete a particular type of form. In this case, I'm going to assign this to you, this task. You're going to go and deal with it. And when you're there, I'm going to have you complete the biohazard form so that we're covered from a health and safety point of view. I'm going to copy the location from the service request so that the worker knows where it is. And then I'm going to say add task.
Bernie, can you come closer to the phone?
Yes, I'll take it off speaker if I can. Is that better? Is that better, Rachel?
Much, yes.
Good. Okay, my apologies, everybody. Sorry about that. Okay, so I've created and assigned that task now. Now, what I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to go and see whether we can pick that up from a mobile worker perspective actually on the application. So I'm going to see if I can wake up my smartphone again and see if I can share my screen with you. Again, Rachel, I just ask for your assistance to allay my concerns and make sure that it is actually sharing on screen. Great, thanks, Rachel. So I'll go back into our council applications, and this time I'm going to go into the generic application again, but instead of looking at any of the specific reported issues, what I'm going to do is go into mobile worker. And you'll see I've got a bunch of service requests that have historically been assigned to me. I'm just going to go and I'm going to refresh that and see whether the service request that I've just created and the task that I've just created has appeared on my particular task list. If you recall, I'm logged in as mobile.worker, and that was who I assigned it to when I was fulfilling the role of a CSA or a mobile worker supervisor in the back office. And you can see that this address, the abandoned vehicle issue, has in fact been assigned out to me. So with the swipe of the screen, I've now got that information about this task assigned to me and on screen. And if I drop into that, I can see the individual photo or photos or videos that are attached. They now are on my device, held securely. I can see the status of it, and crucially, I can look at all of the details around that particular service request. So I can look at the individual questions and answers and the submission date. I can look at any notes that were added by the call centre agent. I can look at the location details, tells me exactly where it is. I can look at any documents that were attached, and crucially, sitting underneath that, I've got the instruction of the task that was also assigned to me, which said, please inspect and remove vehicle. So I can go in and I can view the details of that specific task that's been assigned to me. What you'll also notice is sitting at the bottom of that, I've got a form that I need to complete. And there may be that there's a rule sitting behind that form that says I can't sign this off or change the status of it until I've completed that fire hazard form. So if I go into that, I've then got, it's a very simple example, what's the type of fire hazard? You might have a more complicated form, but you've got a form. So what you're effectively doing is creating a process that can work completely digitally. I can also go in here and I can change the status. I can edit all of the metadata around the piece. I can look at the location. I can get directions to that location within the application. I can also view any of the planning data about planned start and actual start and end dates. So I've got a full set of configurable tools that the council can use to enable not just the inbound process of a customer reporting this issue, but also the fact that I then want to deal with that in as automated way as possible in terms of assigning it out to mobile workers and so on and so forth. But I'm conscious that we're moving quite quickly through quite a lot of material. I've got a couple of things that I would like to show you before we finish up, but I'm hoping as a set of processes and procedures that makes sense. Now, final comment on mobile worker at this stage is that it's a privilege-based system, so if I'm a customer using this version of the app, of course I won't see the mobile worker tab, but if I'm an authorised mobile worker, then I will see the mobile worker tab, and I'll only see reports that have been assigned to me, and they'll be held securely on the device. And once I've got them on the device, I can work with them offline, and I can work with them online. So there's a couple of other things that I'd like to show you. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we are also heading in the direction of enabling local authorities with tools that enable you to make operational the fact that customers are using ungoverned and unmediated channels, things like Twitter. And I've just set up a little example that I'd like to share with you if I can. I'm going to start that example by just opening up another tab in my iPhone. Sorry to bear all on my iPhone, so you can see all of the various things that I use. But if I go to Twitter and just look at my profile, and I made a tweet this morning, a couple of hours ago, just before we got started, that said, hosting my council services webinar today, last chance to book a place, hashtag digital, hashtag channel shift, hashtag transformation, just as really is kind of an exercise to show you this piece of functionality. So I could be a customer raising a service request for a particular authority or choosing to say something about an authority that I expect them to pick up and deal with. So just hold that thought around that tweet that I created this morning. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump across to another back office interface of a test environment that we're developing at the moment. That's got, you'll notice under the service request page, we've got social media as a tab. Now I can do a few things here. So this is effectively a tool that is going to enable local authorities to harness what is largely an unmediated channel, things like Twitter and Facebook, so that they can start to build those social media channels into their more systematic approaches for managing and dealing with requests from customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to say, well, I want to look at tweets from a location-based perspective. So I'm going to say I want everything in a 1 mile radius of a particular postcode. So in this case, I'm going to search for everything within 1 miles of NR15 1TP. I do hope that everyone on the call is completely reputable, because I'm sharing quite a lot of information about where I am today and about my personal usage of mobile technology. So I'm going to search the map for that, and it will automatically locate where I'm at. So if I just click on Done, it then defines that selection geographically in terms of location details. And now what I'm going to do is say, well, I'm interested as a local authority to look, in this example, for everything that's got to do with channel shift. So I'm going to select that. I could be looking for anything that's got to do with fly tipping or untidy streets or any combination of words that you can set up as constant filters that are going on. And then I'm going to search on that particular term. And what you'll see, I've made a mistake as a user, is that I haven't selected a service request category. So I'll go and do that now. But nonetheless, it's gone and it's retrieved all of the tweets within that geographical selection that contain the word channel shift from this morning. Now, given that I'm out in rural South Norfolk, I'm not surprised I'm the only person that's tweeted channel shift this morning. But yesterday morning, I had the privilege of meeting with head of service at Southwark Council, and I ran this live. And there's quite a few interesting tweets that came back as part of the search that were directly related to operational issues. And the key there is that what I'm now in a position to do is, if I wanted to, is if this was someone tweeting about a fly tip or an issue somewhere in the borough, I could I could create a service request directly from this and pick it up automatically. And also, based on certain filters, if I'm confident and I've got process mapped and set up, I can also create automatically those service requests. So not only am I harnessing self-service channels from a perspective of, I think I may have just temporarily lost my connection. I hope you can see me. Rachel, can you see my screen okay? Hi, Rachel.
Hello, yes, sorry, I couldn't get off mute. Yeah, I can see your screen, but it says one error has occurred on the top.
Okay.
I can't see your phone screen, I can see your PC screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, how about now? Can you see a search screen where it's returned my tweet from this morning that I searched for?
Yes, but I've still got the drop down on top. So it looks like it's frozen. Oh, no, now it's, no. It looks like it's frozen.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've lost a little bit of connectivity there. I'm going to try that again. Let me just refresh that. My apologies for this, everybody.
Oh, no, yeah, unable to connect.
Okay, not to worry. I'll finish up. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's just come back up.
Great. Okay, thanks. So I'll finish up. I'm conscious of time. We're coming up to the hour. I hope you caught most of that before we had that slight connectivity issue. My apologies for that if you dropped anything out. But the concept being that you can now not only start to harness those highly governed and managed channels such as native applications and your website, but customers are inevitably going to start to use things like Twitter and Facebook to talk about the service that you're providing, and we are now providing tools that allow you to capture and garner the flexibility and power of those environments. A couple of things that I just want to finish up on. We've looked at the service request screen in terms of the life cycle of a service request. I just want to finish up with a couple of bits and pieces. We offer a fairly comprehensive dashboard in terms of accessing data around the way that people are using customer channels. And also I mentioned that all of these things are completely configurable. Now I'm not going to give you a detailed walkthrough now in the last 30 seconds or so that I've got remaining, but you've got a full dynamic forms capability, so you can go and design forms and deploy them out to native application and to web simultaneously, or one or the other. You can configure dynamic tabs on your application and on your web portal manifestation. And crucially, if you are in the business of designing forms that you want customers to use, we've also instigated what we call the form store. So if you want to look at other abandoned vehicle forms that other councils have created, you can just search for those and it will return them. Most authorities have launched an abandoned vehicle, and you can go in and you can preview that form. So we'll look at Belfast City Council's example, and we could go on and we could use it in the way that they've designed it. And if we like the look of it, let's take a look at Blackburn's one. If we like the way that Blackburn are using that particular form, then what we can do is we can just select that form and we can import it into our environment. The master copy that's owned by Blackburn and Darwin Council is untouched and it still belongs to them, but you now have a local copy of that you can edit and change in any way that you want. So I'm just going to finish up on that note with a little bit of advice to get started. So consider the availability of constant internet connections, because if you're using a native application, you don't necessarily have to have an internet connection. You can use a form offline and online. That's important for both mobile working and it's important for customer access. We would encourage you not to get hung up on what CRM system you have. Integration is generally very straightforward into most systems, and alternatively, if you don't have a CRM system, you can use our contact center tool. And one of the things about MCS, certainly in the current climate, that I think is appealing to our 25 customers, is that it's relatively low cost to get started and relatively low cost of ownership. And it would not be unreasonable to start to see a business case that delivered a return on initial investment within 6 months. Our other advice, I think, is to get started with some tactical wins and plan for the mid to longer term strategic goals. It's quick to get started, and you can do some of this very, very quickly. And think carefully, if you're thinking about doing any development internally, how much the ongoing cost of ownership of keeping those things up to date might be. There is some very effective off-the-shelf software that can be used to good effect for these tools, and we'd like to think that My Council Services is part of that solution set. And in terms of launching these services, we should strongly recommend that you educate frontline staff on the plan and what the capabilities are that you're enabling through self-service. Good ambassadors on the phone or face-to-face are a great way to drive adoption through these digital self-service channels. And on that note, everybody, we're just about on schedule. My apologies for being a couple of seconds over, a couple of minutes over. I hope you found that useful. And my colleague Rachel will be distributing a copy of the slides post the event at some point today for you. Thank you very much, everybody.